I have to hear that. I'm so nervous.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is David Halpern, and I'm here on behalf of the State of Israel Bonds and the American Society of Yad Vashem. Welcome to Beit HaTfutzot. Welcome to Beit HaTfutzot, the Museum of the Jewish People. This is Beit HaTfutzot, the Museum of the Jewish People. In this place, they tried to tell the story of the Jewish people. And you know that's quite a story. Tens of thousands of books have been written about the story and the history of the Jewish people. And they do a very, very good job encapsulating it here in this one place. I know we don't have too much time tonight, but if you do have time to come here and spend a day or two, you'll find it a very, very fascinating museum. And tonight we have a fascinating program as well. We're going to have an interview. Iryna Nevzlin will be interviewed by Czvika Kline. Iryna Nevzlin, she was born in Moscow, and she is an Israeli entrepreneur and author of The Impact of Identity, The Power of Knowing Who You Are. As chair of the board of directors of the Museum of the Jewish People at Beit HaTfutzot in Tel Aviv, Iryna led a comprehensive transformation of then Diaspora Museum, built in 1978. And it has morphed into the Museum of the Jewish People, which you see today. She was instrumental in raising over $100 million to create this transformation. And you will hopefully get to see this either a little bit tonight and sometime in the future. As the president of the Nadav Foundation, founded in 2003 by her father, Leonid Nevzlin, Iryna is actively promoting projects that build a sense of Jewish peoplehood and strengthen collective Jewish identity by fostering ongoing relationships among Jews throughout the world. I'm sure that she will be very interesting when we hear from her. Czvika Kline is an award-winning journalist who writes for Makor Rishon, a weekly newspaper covering Jewish diaspora affairs. He served as an advisor to Israel's President's Office on Israel-Jewish diaspora relations. He received 3 journalism awards for his work, the most recent B'nai B'rith World Center Award for Journalism, recognizing excellence in diaspora reportage. Kline's article, 10 Hours of Fear and Loathing in Paris, which went viral, and his video showing a 10-hour walk in Paris wearing a kippah, received millions of views. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy this interview. Czvika, please.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening, Iryna. How are you?
Good, good. I'm looking at your socks.
Yeah, I got special menorah socks because I am visiting the Museum of the Jewish People, right? So, and it's not Israeli, it's from Walmart, so it's not very exciting. I could have said it's like a fancy company. So how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Okay.
Excited to be here.
Me too. So, so it was mentioned actually, a few minutes ago that you recently published your first book, So Mazal Tov. By the way, is publishing a book like having a baby? They say it is, but I haven't given birth yet, and my first book is almost finished.
It was an early birth, though. It took me 6 months. So.
Wow.
It was a little bit better,
Okay.
shorter.
Okay. Nice. I'm pregnant for a while now. So it's interesting. So in your book, you talk about being an immigrant. And just recently, I spoke to a group of high school kids. And I told them that all the articles I write about anti-Semitism, so people, like all the comments in Hebrew on the website will be like, make Aliyah. Why don't they make Aliyah? What are they doing there? Which is a very Israeli approach, unfortunately. And I told these people, I said, have you ever been an immigrant? It's one of the worst experiences I think a person could go through, even if you're idealistic and you do it for that cause. So I'm wondering, before you even get to the book, but what was the most difficult thing about being an immigrant?
First of all, I want to say that I'm so excited that you're all here. The real birth and real baby is this museum for me, and that's been 12 years.
It's an expensive baby. $100 million.
Yeah, I mean,
That's.
You really need to invest. I mean, if you want to
Right.
really see the baby with potential, right? So,
Right.
so thank you all for being here, and I hope you'll come back. And I'll also let you know that in 2020, this year, sorry, I have to switch now. In the end of this year, in October, we're going to open the full museum, and nobody will have to suffer saying Beit התפוצות anymore. Well, you can just say the Museum of the Jewish People, but that we can talk about it later if we have time.
We will have time. Okay.
So first of all, my experience of being an immigrant was a very positive experience. It might have something to do with my mindset generally. I was an immigrant twice. I came from Moscow to London first for 3 years, and it was a cultural shock, and on many levels. And then I made Aliyah to Israel 12 years ago, and that was yet another time to be an immigrant. Now, the difficulty, and I think there are a lot of people who can relate to that difficulty, whether you are immigrant yourself or you were born to parents who are immigrants and you heard the stories, right? The biggest difficulty, I think, is that if, as a person, you constantly grow and you develop, but when you're an immigrant, what happens is that the change that you have to go through and the difference between the life that you had before and now is so overwhelming and so big that you don't have a minute to rest. And you have to deal with the questions, whether they are very small questions, and where I buy the bread that I like now, or something like that, or to the big decisions, who are my friends, what kind of things I like, what kind of hobbies. But I think the difficulty, I think it's a great experience. Ultimately, I believe it builds resilience and strength that you need in the global world. But because you don't have a it's constant. You don't have a minute to rest. You always go through the change. So I think that's pretty.
I know for many friends who immigrated, either made Aliyah or immigrated other places, your brain is so tired from a new language. At the end of the day, you're like tired, more tired than like a local, right? And
it's not only language. I mean, it's more than a language. I was in Israel for first 2 years. I had some Hebrew before, but let's say, I didn't have enough Hebrew to hold a proper conversation. And so in order for me to learn Hebrew, I realized that I need to stop people from talking English to me. So what I would do is I would pretend, and I've started working already, so I would pretend that I understand. So the whole notion of like smiling, and I would get it, I'm intuitive, so I'll get it, but with the cues from other, but I would understand 50% of what people were saying. But holding it up and you know, and pretending that you actually know takes a lot of energy.
I did that in school, but it wasn't a language issue. It was just, you know. So in your book, you pretty much say that nowadays we're all immigrants. So is it being adaptive to new things, or is it always being on the move or changing? What is it to be an immigrant today?
I will clarify. I not only we're all immigrants, but we're also all minorities. So I think we need to understand that if we look at the life, say 30, 40, 50 years ago, you were pretty much, you could predict what your life is going to look like, in the sense that you're born to this type of parents, you'll do this type of thing, you'll live in that type of place, right? So you had it all covered, and maybe boring, but covered. Right? And now we live in the world where the change, what we spoke about, the immigrants' experience, we all have to go through that experience every minute of the day because of the technological revolution, because of everything. So first, we just have to go through that constantly. Second, in terms of minority, I think it's very important to understand. We're used to the world where there's minority and majority, right? But if you look now at the population of, I don't know, I won't take in Israel as the biggest minority ever, right? But if we look at the...
Let's not get into the Israeli politics, or else we're going to...
Not 2 weeks before elections,
okay.
Please, no. But if we look, for example, in the country such as France, right? You can feel a majority, and being French and feel a majority. However, when you have 1.5 billion Chinese, hopefully not everyone is sick still, you suddenly realize that this is a minority. So I think the skills that minorities and immigrants have, they give a lot of strength to people who have to live now in the global world.
So what types of skills are skills that immigrants need and that the average person could use to make himself better?
So first, adaptability. You really have to, you don't have a choice. I mean, immigrants have to go through that sometimes painful, difficult growth experience, but because they have no choice. But in reality, all of us have to go constantly through different changes. So I think this flexibility and adaptability that builds resilience. I also think, and I know I'm talking in the audience, which is predominantly English native-speaking audience, but when you have an extra language, and you don't really need that, I'm very jealous, you don't really need to learn extra language to be able to communicate everywhere in the world. But learning a new language, there's a lot of research about that. I'm not a researcher, but when you learn a new language, you also learn the different cultural cues. You
differences,
learn
mentality
and everything. And I think in our time, in the world that is so open and global, learning an extra language is just simply a must to be able to communicate in this global village.
Right. So your book, so it was interesting because, like, when I know you said, I know you were working on a book and then you published a book. So I was expecting the cover to be very Jewish, right? Because this museum, you'll see a Magen David everywhere, and you go to the bathroom, there's a Leonard Cohen little exhibit there. That's my favorite part. But then the book, I think maybe the thing that's most Jewish is like the roots on the cover. So I'm wondering, how do you connect this issue of the theme of the book to your work in the Jewish world?
So I'll tell you, first of all, it's, I don't know, this audience is the right audience to say that. I think Jews can teach the world a lot of things, right? So our Jewish experience and our connection to the roots and the process that we have to go through to build identity, I think I always say that we've invented globalization, really, because we had to be without the country, without feeling of our...
So a video of you is now going online, and it's going to be shared all over the world, and then globalists
and let's see the results of the elections,
Exactly.
So I think that this, because we didn't have a country, we had a fantasy of a country, we had an idea of the country, but we didn't have a physical country. We've developed a very strong connection to our roots, just because we didn't have a choice to substitute it maybe with a flag or an anthem or something which, when you're born in your own country, you can do. So I've learned, and my book for me it's the same process that I go through with the museum and with the book. I think there is no option of having a meaningful and interesting life if you don't have an ability to always question yourself and ask yourself who you are and where you belong. So your personal identity and your collective identity. Now the answers are irrelevant, frankly. They are relevant only to you in this moment of time, right? So if I have to answer a question, who I am, I have to give a very long list for which I'm very happy because the experiences are, enriching, but I'm Jewish and I'm a woman and I was a minority and I was born in Russia, which is authoritarian, and I moved to Israel, and I'm a majority now, and I'm Israeli, and all of that builds who I am. Now, I wrote a book with understanding that I think people have a lot to learn from this experience, not only from mine. What I said is relevant to many people here. However, this experience builds an ability to have a meaningful and interesting life for non-Jews as well. So I think that if I take it back to the question that you asked, how could this book be relevant to the Jewish world, I was trying to find a way of making being Jewish exciting and powerful and positive and relevant to someone who is young. Because I believe that we have this notion of, we all are in the business of continuity, right? Anybody who is here cares about the Jewish future. Everybody is interested in a question, that way or another, how we're going to make the younger generation interested in keeping their Jewishness. In whatever shape or form. For somebody it's religion, for somebody it's roots, for somebody it's culture. It doesn't really matter. So for me, it was an attempt, this book was an attempt, while I wasn't addressing specifically the Jewish audience, but I think you can make being Jewish cool. And I think you can make it cool by explaining to people that the connection to your roots is what makes your life so powerful, interesting, and fascinating. So for me, this was my attempt, and it's interesting. I have an email now for Ireena as an author, so Ireena Nvzlin book, and of course I start every morning now, and I'm totally excited when some people in the audience send me the reaction to my book, right? And
fan mail.
Yes.
Fan mail.
And when I get the reaction, which is more than great, got your book, thank you, we'll never read it again because I don't have time to read books. But when I get a reaction from
it's actually not so long, so you could breeze through it.
That was the idea. Who can do the?
It's for millennials, you're saying.
Yes.
Okay.
It's for everyone.
Everyone.
Who can read the book with more than? I don't know.
Right.
There are books 500 pages. I still have them near my bed. I'm still waiting. They're very fascinating book. I heard. I read all the reviews.
Your sons had lots of fun creating things with them or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
But what I want to say is that I got an email a couple of days ago from somebody who is 16. And I'm not going to mention his name because I didn't ask for his approval. And he got the book from his father. And he wrote to me that he now got sort of a guideline. And he's 16, he's very Jewish, lives in Miami. And he wrote, this is how I can learn about how to make my place in history. And some things that I can adapt to my life. And so for me, I think that was the first moment when I realized that it was a good thing that I wrote a book, because I finally saw that somebody young, and I don't know usually how to speak to younger generation. I have young sons, but I mean, they're not interested in talking about identity.
Right.
But I think if this book could help younger generation to say why being Jewish is cool, I think I did my job.
Maybe you could tell me like a big celebrity somewhere wrote it and then give it to them. Just change the name on the cover and they'll read it and they'll be like, wow.
Yeah. Kim Kardashian, I was told.
Kim Kardashian wrote the book, exactly.
Deals a lot with identity.
I don't know if your son's like Kim Kardashian, but whatever.
No,
okay.
No.
So they'll fire me if we don't speak a little bit about your husband, Yuli Edelstein, the Speaker of the Knesset. So it's interesting, I think, the connection between you, because you yourself are, consider yourself a secular Jew. What?
You can see by the look, no?
Looks are misleading. And Yuli, the Speaker of the Knesset, is religious, whereas the kippah has been, very dominant and representative of the religious Zionist community in Israel. So how does that work? I mean, like, my wife and I grew up in similar backgrounds, but like, it's difficult, and you guys are from totally different religious backgrounds.
So first, can I
even though geographically you're from the same area.
Geographically, but still,
right.
It's Ukraine. He does believe
Ukraine,
that's the center of the world, and I'm from Moscow, but whatever.
It's like New Jersey, right?
Thank you, Chernobyl. Okay. It's like New Jersey. I can't explain it to him. There's a huge difference between Moscow and Chernobyl.
Okay.
First,
I'm embarrassed to say I was never in Russia, just in Ukraine. So
lucky guy.
Fire me.
Lucky guy, really.
Okay.
I don't recommend to anyone going next couple of years. I don't think.
Okay.
Listen, it's. We were worried in the very beginning. I have to say we were really worried because we got married at the age where both of us quite clearly knew the answer to the question, who you are. Now, of course, everybody can change, things can change, but there's some things that you know about yourself, right? So in the beginning, it was there was a lot of tension.
Well, men have to change. Women don't have to change. Yeah. We're told what to do, we do it, right? So.
Right.
Okay.
But it was interesting because there was a lot of assumptions. For example, because he's a politician and because he's a very and he chose to be religious, so he grew into that. So that usually makes people even more significant for them because he made that choice. So there was a lot of assumptions, I think, in the environment, not between us, but in the environment. So maybe I'll have to follow his lead, and I come from the. I'm not happy about that, but I come from the country where learning about being Jewish was impossible. It wasn't the choice. My grandparents spoke Yiddish and they didn't know Russian, but with the communists coming into play instead of religion, it's not like up until the age of high school, I had a choice to understand what it means to be Jewish at all. I didn't have any education. So we come from a very, very different background. And then, of course, both very Jewish in the sense that feeling of belonging to Jewish people, this part of collective identity. I mean, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important for me, right? I live in this museum generally until Dan, the CEO, kicks me out sometimes, not to bother and to be able to work. What was interesting is that if you are able to have a normal conversation about it, and honest conversation with yourself first. In other words, it doesn't work if the conversation is always a dialogue. Mm-hmm. right? It works only if you can ask yourself honestly and truly what do you really need and what you don't really need, what you want, what you don't want. So we found over years, we found a formula whereby we like all our family, including the newly bought dog, have a...
Mazal tov.
Thank you.
What's the dog's name?
Kiki.
Kiki.
She's as crazy as it gets. I mean,
Okay.
but it's a beagle. But we found a formula which works for everyone. So Yulia, as you said, he's in the one part of the, spectrum. Yes, being Shomer Shabbat and everything. Now I have two sons, who one of them is curious and fascinated by Jewish tradition and loves to wear kippah on Shabbat and loves the Shabbat meal and wants to go with Yuli once in a while for sure though, but to the synagogue. Then I have another son who has no understanding why this thing is happening in the house and why iPad is, what's wrong with iPad on Shabbat. And then you have me, who I have a lot of respect for my Jewish roots, and I'm absolutely thrilled that I have a Shabbat dinner, and the whole idea of not cooking, I mean, I didn't cook any other day. But now
you have an excuse.
I have an excuse not to cook yet another day. So I think, but...
I can't do the dishes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No dishes.
No,
Shabbos.
no. But I think if ultimately it comes back to, I'm sorry being annoying and saying the same thing, it comes back to knowing, to ask yourself who you are, what's important to you, what's not important to you, and then obviously being able to communicate that. So we kind of, I mean, we still sometimes, it's, and another thing I'll say, and it's funny because I think all the couples have issues. What happens is when you have a very different way of life is that these issues are focused on one topic. But that stimulates you to talk. You just don't have an option, because we have to figure out how we're going to do this or that, and this holiday and that holiday. And I think it kind of pushes you to have a conversation which, if you have a very similar lifestyle, you can avoid just because you don't have we have this tension which is obvious. Mm-hmm. So